Hi, Emily here from Homemade Emily Jane. Today I'm going to teach you how to make a signature memory quilt. A signature memory quilt is when people sign each block of the quilt to come together into a really nice, memorable item filled with all of the well wishes from your loved ones. I made myself a signature memory quilt as my wedding guest book. So every guest at my wedding signed a block and it's come together into this beautiful quilt that we literally get to wrap ourselves up with the love of our friends and family. Memory quilts would be wonderful for other occasions as well, maybe for a graduation or retirement or a wedding or maybe even a baby shower. Before we dive into how to make it, I want to share with you some of the prep work that I did. The memory quilt that I made ended up being a large throw size, and I used blocks that were a reverse sawtooth star block that were each 8 inches square. Of course, you can decide how you want to make your memory quilt, but this is what I did for my wedding guest book memory quilt. I decided to make the quilt blocks in advance so that when the guests show up at the wedding, they can actually sign the block rather than just a piece of fabric. So each guest got to sign their own block. But of course, if you're hosting a large event like that, you might not know how many guests to plan for or how many people would actually sign a block. So what I did is I took the number of invites that I sent out for households and then added a couple extra blocks just to be safe, and I ended up having some blocks left over afterwards, but I would much rather have more blocks than I need rather than not enough. I get asked quite often which permanent markers are the best to use, so I actually tested out 4 different kinds. The one that I recommend is a Marvy Uchida in black, and I'll drop a link in the description below so you can shop that on Amazon. One neat tip that you might consider is to actually put freezer paper to the back of the quilt blocks where people will be signing. You can iron the freezer paper onto the back of the block, and it provides an extra layer of stability so that the fabric is easy to write on when your guests are signing the blocks. You can then peel the freezer paper off of the quilt block once they're done signing and sew the quilt together. One common question I get is, how do you keep people from signing in the seam allowance when people make memory quilts? And that is exactly the reason why I chose to make my quilt blocks in advance, so that they were signing and the seam allowance had already been sewn together. I want to share with you 5 quilt blocks that you can make that might be great for a signature memory quilt. Any of these quilt blocks that I share with you can be made with any size mix and match cube using your AccuQuilt cutting machine. So first off, I shared with you earlier, I made mine using a reverse sawtooth star. This one is a reverse sawtooth star where you would put your background fabric or your lighter, either a white or a cream fabric, as the star, and then use the colors of your quilt, the prints or the solids, as the outside of the star. This leaves a really great space in the center of the block for your signatures, for people to write their messages on the quilt block itself. This is a 10-inch square. You can actually make these in pretty much a 6-inch, 8-inch, 10-inch would all be perfect for a memory quilt because there's plenty of size in the centerpiece for your guests to sign. Next up, if you're looking for a very easy and simple quilt block to use for a signature memory quilt, you might consider using an uneven 9 patch. This one's really fun to do. I would suggest having the signatures be in the large center square, and then you can have the outside corners either the same color as the center square or a different color altogether, and you can do it scrappy or have them all be the same color for the outside pieces. Whatever you choose, it comes together really fast and is super easy. Again, a great one for 6-inch, 8-inch, or 10-inch squares. And one more that's good for those size square blocks is the economy quilt block. If you want a tutorial for how to make an economy quilt block, I actually have 2 already up on my YouTube channel. One teaches you how to make it using AccuQuilt like I did for this one, or another version teaches you how to make it using traditional methods, and it includes a chart for cutting out the correct size pieces. The economy quilt block would feature one color that goes directly outside the center square and then a second color that goes on the outer corners, and then put them all together into a quilt. These next 2 quilt blocks I'm going to share with you are really great if you're going to go for a 10-inch or larger square because the place that people sign on is a little bit smaller. So this one is called a depression quilt block, and it has a really nice center diamond that people can sign in and really intricate fun piecing around the sides so that it really brings out that traditional patchwork and piecing part to your quilt. This is a 10-inch block, and it has a good size square for people to sign their message in the center, but then from afar, if you have a lot of these blocks together, it's still a very dynamic and engaging pieced quilt. And the final block I want to share with you today is called the Airplane Quilt Block. This is unique in that it actually has 4 spaces where people could sign for the memory quilt. So it would be perfect if you have a lot of people that you want to get to sign, such as like for a retirement and having everyone's coworker sign or something along those lines. Now I'd like to transition into talking about the actual event. If you're having people sign them at a wedding like I did, or maybe even at a baby shower or a party of some sort, I definitely recommend having someone in charge of getting the block signed. Someone that's willing to be outgoing and talk to strangers and invite them to sign a quilt block. Someone that will help them come up with ideas for what to write as well. You'll want to have the quilt block set up at a designated table where people can find the block that they want to sign, quickly grab a pen and write their message. I personally used some pretty baskets as well to store mine in so that it was nice and pretty on display. But you can decide what's best for your event. So once you get all of your memory quilt blocks signed, the next thing to do is put them together into a quilt. Now, of course, you might not exactly know how many people will be signing blocks, so it might be difficult to figure out what size quilt you're going to end up with. And that's where you have to just kind of make your best guess with the size of blocks that you're making and how many can come together into either a square or rectangle. I ended up getting less blocks than I had anticipated, so what I did is I actually wrote quotes and Bible verses on some of the extra blocks that I had to make it into a finished quilt. And then I also added sashing borders in between each block to make each block stand out on its own. So now it's your turn for you to make your own signature memory quilt. If you make one, I'd love to hear about it. Be sure to drop a comment below or reach out to me on Instagram or through email as well. If you want more quilting tutorials, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up below. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure that you find me on homemadeemilyjane.com for lots more quilting tips and tricks.